Hello, everyone. This is a webinar on how to determine the root causes of your workplace incidents. I think you'll enjoy this webinar. It's very informative and will certainly help you with your investigations. We are re-recording it, so you won't see an audience with us today. We had technical issues with the recording of the live webinar, so we're redoing it for anyone that wanted to share with their colleagues. So who am I? My name is Tyler Friedline. I'm a safety professional with SOS Safety Solutions. I graduated from Indiana University of Pennsylvania with a degree in safety, health, and environmental applied science. IUP was actually the first safety school in the country, which started after a grant from OSHA shortly after the agency's conception. Currently in my fourth year with SOS Safety Solutions, and we work in essentially all industries from manufacturing, social services, schools, agriculture, healthcare, and waste management. And I've been involved to different levels with hundreds, if not thousands of incidents in my career. That's why you see I have less hair than I did in this photo here when I started with SOS 4 years ago. So what are we going to talk about today? We're not just talking about root cause analysis. That is the main component, but it is just one component of incident investigation, right? And if you're missing these other pieces, you're not going to be able to determine the root cause. So we're going to talk about some safety 101 stuff, why we investigate and what to investigate, as well as the basic causes of incidents, because we want you to be able to differentiate the basic causes from the root causes. There's a piece on incident investigation, then root cause analysis, and we have some pretty good incident scenarios. Remember, we work with all industries, so the scenarios might not be exactly pertaining to your industry. However, I think that they are easy to understand, and it'll still help you determine the underlying causes of your incidents. Then we'll talk about developing corrective actions and how we, make sure they're as effective as possible. And then we have a larger root cause scenario that if you're watching this recording, I ask that you participate in it and make sure you have a piece of scratch paper and a pen or pencil handy for that last section there. So objective one, why and what we investigate. So why do we investigate? Investigations uncover deficiencies in our training or procedures, or maybe damaged equipment, things that need repair. And when we do that, we can develop corrective actions to prevent incidents from recurring. It's not uncommon for the clients that I work with to see the same injuries occurring again and again until we truly get to the root cause. So that's the goal of what we're talking about today. It's also going to demonstrate management's commitment at your organization to safety and health of employees. It's going to save money and it's going to save lives. So what is an accident? An accident is an unplanned and unwanted event that disrupts work processes by causing injury or damage. And I hear the term accident all the time. So I interview injured employees as part of my role with SOS Safety Solutions. And I'd say maybe 5 or 10% of the time, the employee starts by saying, well, it was just a freak accident. And I think to myself, no, it's not. Perhaps they were using a cutting device and got a laceration. Well, that's a predictable incident. If you're using a knife, you could cut yourself. That's predictable. See, an accident is, it's rarely due to a random happening or act of nature or act of God, whatever you want to call it. That's a very rare occurrence. And most safety professionals will tell you that incidents are preventable and predictable, and they're distinct from accidents. And as a result, my company, SOS Safety Solutions, lots of companies and organizations are really moving away from the term accident to using the term incident. And what should we investigate? So this is an incident ratio model that's kind of well known amongst safety professionals. And what this says is for every death or serious injury, there's usually about 29 minor injuries, 300 near misses, and 3,000 unsafe acts, behaviors, or conditions, right? Somebody might get injured and they might say, I walked over that trip hazard, which is an unsafe condition, thousands of times and never got hurt. But it only takes that one time, right? But unfortunately, we tend to focus on the stuff at the top, where somebody goes to see a doctor and we have an OSHA recordable incident. That's the stuff we tend to focus on, right? Where there's much less investigations for near misses, where a near miss is an incident where nobody was hurt, but they very well could have been hurt if things had lined up a little differently or occurred a little differently, right? What I want you to focus on is the near misses and unsafe acts and behaviors where we could have a very, very serious injury with serious consequences if it's not resolved. Not just the stuff where somebody goes to a doctor or we have a recordable incident, because like I said, near misses could very well have ended the same way if things were just a little different there. Right. So our biggest injury causing potential is down at the bottom: unsafe acts, behaviors, or conditions. And this is something you want to think about if you have a near miss. And hey, what's the degree that we should investigate and try to prevent this? Right. So safety people think in terms of probability and severity. And this is a tool that you can use at your organization for doing that. Maybe you have a hazard that you want to mitigate, and you want to, maybe you could use this for ranking your priority of corrective actions for your safety committee, or ranking maybe your maintenance tasks that need to be completed. So there's two different things. At the top, you see severity of occurrence. So a catastrophic injury would be death or permanent total disability could occur. Critical would be a disability in excess of 3 months. Substantial would be a lost workday case. Marginable would be a medical injury, and negligible would be a first aid or minor medical treatment. And then on the y-axis, the probability of occurrence, we have frequent, it's likely to occur repeatedly; probable, likely to occur several times; occasional, likely to occur sometime; remote, not likely to occur at all; and improbable is very unlikely, may assume exposure will not happen. And what you can use this for is, say you have a near miss and you say, well, somebody could have died from the incident, right? So that would be a catastrophic outcome as far as the severity goes, right? And even if that's improbable that it'll occur, you can see it's still a medium risk, right? If it's occasional and catastrophic, you can see it's a very high risk. Versus the other end of the spectrum is you might have a negligible injury where just first aid is performed and it's remote, it's not likely to occur. Well, that's still a low risk, right? Unfortunately, we can't prevent every type of incident entirely. Safety people use the term residual risk. You might have residual risk at your organization that you can't entirely cut out, even if you have controls applied to the situation. So use this in terms of knowing when you really need to get rid of a hazard or when you really need to put solid corrective actions in place to prevent an incident based on the probability and severity. And there's different tools for you doing this. This is the ANSI, stands for American National Standards Institute. It's a consensus organization. This is their Z10 risk assessment matrix. Another safety 101 thing that I want you to understand is the Swiss cheese model of incidents. So what this says is there's initiating event or hazard, and you have your engineering controls, such as machine guarding in place. You have your administrative controls, which are your policies and procedures. And then you have your behavioral controls and culture, right? And you might have gaps in each one of these categories. And whenever they line up right, like a piece of Swiss cheese, those holes just line up correctly to an incident occurring. And that's why, you know, when an incident occurs, there's usually more than one underlying cause, right? We might find issues in the administrative and behavioral area on an incident. It's going to lead us to different causes. So we're not just looking for a single cause. Who investigates? I'm a big believer that, you know, 2 heads, 3 heads, 4 heads are better than one, right? So don't make investigating incidents an individual task for that individual supervisor where the incident occurred, or maybe just for your safety manager. Make it a team effort. You know, a good tool might be your safety committee. I know in the state of Pennsylvania, we have state certified committees, and a big component of annual training for Pennsylvania safety committees is incident investigation. It's the largest topic there. So safety committees can really be leveraged in the process, and make sure that most of your team investigating the incident understand the process, right? It's always useful after an incident to talk and speak with employees in the area that have a deeper understanding of processes, procedures, and equipment in the area. Moving on to our second bullet, basic causes of incident, right? So these are basic causes, and these are distinct from root causes. They're two different things. Typically, a basic cause is not going to be a root cause. What are they? We have unsafe acts. So you can see unsafe ladder use. You see an employee walking through a parking lot where vehicles are being driven, looking down at the cell phone, right? We see that lots nowadays. And then you see an employee lifting with very poor posture, and the coworkers are throwing their hands up in the air saying, "What are you doing?" But they're also not going to help them. So those are your unsafe acts. And then we have unsafe conditions, right? So here you see an extension cord posing a trip hazard. You see overloaded multi-plug adapters, and you see a damaged hard hat. I will tell you, in my opinion, the unsafe conditions are a lot easier to address than the unsafe acts, right? Because if I go to replace that hard hat, it's not going to talk back to me. It doesn't have feelings and opinions, doesn't have emotions. I can pick up that extension cord, right? Again, it's not going to talk back to me. Whereas with unsafe acts, you really have to have soft skills to, discuss a hazard with an employee and explain, "Hey, what's going on? Can we do this differently?" And don't be afraid to do that, right? We all have a different risk appetite and a different level of risk that is acceptable to us. And sometimes we as human beings might not see the risk. And if somebody explains it to us, we might adjust that risk level that we're willing to accept. So other examples of unsafe acts: unsafe ladder use, using unsafe tools, improper lifting, maybe removing safety devices or guards, speeding, overloading outlets. On the unsafe conditions end, we have wet floors, broken stairs, damaged ladders, unsafe storage, perhaps extension cord across an aisleway or blocked exit doors, right? And sometimes an unsafe condition is present due to unsafe acts, right? That can happen too. Moving on to root causes of incident, right? These are distinct, again, from those basic causes. So OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, defines a root cause as a fundamental underlying system-related reason why an incident occurred that identifies one or more correctable system failures. So when I read that, see the word system is in there twice, right? And this is why it's looking for management deficiencies or things with your processes and procedures that are going wrong, right? So the word system is in there twice. So a root cause goes beyond the actions of an individual or physical condition, right? So it's going beyond those unsafe acts and unsafe conditions that are considered basic causes. So an example might be weaknesses in one of your safety plans, such as a fall protection plan or a bloodborne pathogens plan. Management systems such as new hire orientation and training, you might have gaps there. And it could also be an entire department and the way they're functioning, right? But we're not just looking at one individual when we're looking at a root cause. So let's look at different contributors and causes of incidents, right? So this is the way we have it broken up, and you'll see this is also broken up for a root cause scenario in the last section. So we have the management system, such as your safety culture, your policies and procedures there. We have the task that the employee was performing. We have the environment. Did the environment contribute to the incident? We have materials. We're going to put equipment in with the materials category as we go through this training. And then we have personnel, right? These are around what the employee did or failed to do, the behaviors. And this is what is common after an incident, is we just see the personnel what behaviors contribute, what the employee did or didn't do, right? At IUP, when I was first investigating incidents, it was a hard concept to understand, because the first thing I would see is, oh, the employee did this wrong, they did this wrong, they did this wrong. And you're telling me the root cause is this management system related issue, right? So it can be a hard concept to grasp, because as human nature, we see the behavioral issues in there, right? So we want to look beyond that. So this is an accident weed that we're using for reference. If you think about a weed in your garden, if you just cut it off at the top, that weed is going to go back, right? The same goes for your incidents. We have to get to the underlying or root causes and address them to prevent an incident from recurring in the future. So after an accident, it's really easy to see the unsafe behaviors and conditions, right? Those are the symptoms. I want you to think in terms of those being the symptoms. And I want you to think, hey, I see that the employee did X, Y, and Z wrong. I see this unsafe condition, but what are the underlying causes of the unsafe behavior and unsafe conditions? Because that's going to help you get to the root cause. So here's a video. It's minorly graphic, I would say, but I think it demonstrates the point of looking past unsafe acts and conditions to get down to what are the root causes of an incident. So I think this is in a restaurant here, and you have an employee who's going to cut a wire to the buffet. And you can see he just sustained an electric shock there. So not a fun day. I don't believe he was electrocuted, because later on in the video, you hear some people laughing and talking about it. But, you know, it's really easy to say, what is that employee doing? They're just cutting a live wire, right? But imagine if the wiring was installed incorrectly at this buffet. Imagine if this employee went to the breaker panel and it said buffet and he switched it off, right? Would that not be an underlying cause of the incident? The fact that it's mislabeled? There are certainly things that they could do different, right? Electricians have tools called tick tracers, and you can use a tick tracer to tell if there's power going through wiring or not, right? So, but maybe they don't have tick tracers. You know, maybe this employee was asked to do this and it's his first day on the job and he has no idea, and it's a training issue. We have no idea, right? So after an incident, this is the way you're going to feel, is the employee did X, Y, and Z wrong, but you have to realize that there's behaviors and conditions root causes that you cannot yet see. And this also speaks to our safety slogan at SOS Safety Solutions. So it's really frustrating to see. It looks like the guys at the table who are filming might be construction workers, because they have high visibility on, and clearly they're questioning what this person is doing. They're considering that, hey, this person's going to get shocked. Let me pull out my video camera and you know, I can post this to social media. So our slogan at SOS Safety Solutions is asking me to overlook a safety violation is like asking me to compromise my attitude towards the value of your life, right? How do you think those two guys would have felt if the employee died, was electrocuted in this case, right? They could have spoke up and said, hey, are you sure that that shut down? Clearly they knew something was wrong. And I think it speaks to a larger problem, you know, with our society today, that everyone would rather film rather than help somebody that's in a bad situation. So if you see something, say something. You don't want that on your conscience where hey, I could have spoke up and I didn't. So here's a kind of built out accident weed. So at the top, we have the injuries that occur. Maybe it's a burn, perhaps it's a strain, maybe it's a cut. And what you're going to see is the symptoms, the unsafe conditions and the unsafe acts, right? Again, some more examples of the unsafe conditions: broken equipment, a chemical spill, defective PPE. The unsafe acts might be fails to train, horseplay, creates a hazard, ignores a hazard, but the underlying causes are related to your management system, right? Perhaps the horseplay, right? You see that an employee is doing horseplay. Maybe they're surfing on a pallet jack, right? That's not a good idea. However, how could you blame that employee if employees on third shift are doing that every night, right? It would be an enforcement issue. Maybe you have defective PPE, but you've never trained employees to remove damaged PPE from service, or maybe the person in the stock room gives them a hard time every time they try to get new PPE, right? Maybe you have broken equipment, but you don't have any inspection procedures in place to identify damaged equipment, or maybe your maintenance team isn't prioritizing getting damaged equipment fixed, particularly whenever it could cause a bad injury. That goes back to that probability and severity chart, the Z10 risk matrix that we looked at earlier. So again, don't mistake the symptoms that you can easily see whenever you walk upon an incident scene for the underlying causes of the incident. They're distinct things. Unsafe acts and conditions are distinct from root causes. So here's some examples of root causes, right? So we have personal accountability or decision, right? So that one is where you're saying the employee's behavior is the root cause of an incident. And it can happen. I'll explain that here shortly. It's very rare that an employee's behavior is going to be the root cause of the incident. I already explained an act of nature or an act of God, where you truly have a freak accident is going to be a very rare selection. But look at the other ones: lack of leadership enforcement, lack of pre-work planning, poor maintenance systems, lack of poor communication, lack of poor management systems, lack of poor training, lack of poor policies, procedures, third-party actions or inactions, right? These are all dealing with your management system. So these are good examples of root causes. And, I think 9 out of 10 incidents, these would be proper root causes to select. So back to the employee's behavior. Can an employee's behavior be a root cause of an incident? Yes, it can. But it means that you have an adequate safety program in place. You have an adequate policy relating to the task they were performing. It means you have adequate training, and it means you have adequate enforcement, right? So usually 1 or 2 or 3 of these things are missing when an incident occurs. And that's why these are going to be your root causes instead of the employee's behavior. Let's use a little example of where the employee's behavior could be the root cause. Let's pretend that you have a lockout tagout program, right? And you have procedures posted on equipment, and you have adequate training, and your supervisors enforce lockout tagout. An employee just failed to shut down equipment, failed to lock it out, and reached past the guard and lost their finger, right? That's a case where the employee's behavior is truly the root cause because you have everything in place. But don't be so confident after an incident that you do have all these things in place. You have to dig into it to really be able to know. Look at your training records, things like that. Was that employee present at last year's refresher? Things like that. All right, moving on to our next bullet, incident investigation. So steps to an investigation: always, always, always go to the scene of the incident. It's going to help you to preserve and document the scene and collect information. Also, it's going to help you mitigate any unsafe acts or conditions before they injure somebody else, right? Very important to always do that. And it also helps you ensure that the employees telling you, what occurred, you believe that it's true based on what you're seeing there, right? We've had cases where an employee says that they slipped on oil. There is indeed oil on the floor, but there's absolutely no steps through the oil as you would expect. Identify the causal factors. So what contributed to the incident? And we're going to talk about contributing factors here in the next section, because these contributing factors, which are the unsafe acts and conditions, it's another term for unsafe acts and conditions, is contributing factors. And that's going to help us get down to the root cause of the incident, right? Then you want to disclose findings. So discuss it in your management meetings, but at SOS Safety Solutions, we always tell our clients, if you have an incident, review it with all employees. This is going to help heighten their safety awareness around a particular hazard or task, and it's going to help prevent that incident in the future. And also develop a corrective action plan and figure out, hey, what can we do to prevent this in the future? And we're going to talk about how to do that in a later section. And then implement the corrective actions, right? The safety committee can be a great gatekeeper for following up on corrective actions, making sure they're implemented and are properly being followed, right? And that's part of the follow-up. You may need to revise a corrective action as time goes on. So we have 2 little videos here. I just want to show you all this video and then explain what we're looking at.
Take a close look at this dash cam footage. You can see a truck driver nodding off. Then this. You can see 2 cars on the side of the road and a person standing outside them.
Not a fun day at work for either of these people, right? Not a fun day for the management team either, particularly at that warehouse. That's not a good day. So I just want you to imagine what these employees would tell you after the incident. Do you think they would say that I fell asleep at the wheel? Or do you think the person that was driving on the highway might say, oh, there was a dog on the road and I tried to get out of the way to miss it? Imagine we didn't have those cameras, right? And this speaks to the need that if you have an incident, it's so important to go to the scene of the incident and have a complete, clear picture of what happened, right? Often in my experience investigating incidents, I'm really struggling to figure out the underlying causes and I just can't seem to get there. And then a day or 2 later, an employee speaks up. Hey, did you know that X, Y, and Z happened? No, I didn't. But now the entire investigation that we're looking at makes sense. So you have to know the who, what, when, where, and how before you can figure out the why and the underlying causes. So if you're missing information, you're going to have trouble doing a root cause analysis. So the next step as far as conducting a root cause analysis is, like I mentioned, is we have to identify the unsafe acts and unsafe conditions. These are the contributing factors, and we're going to use these contributing factors to determine the underlying causes here in a later section as we go through this. And also consider that you're not going to have a single problem, right? There's not going to be a single contributing factor and there's not going to be a single root cause. Often you're going to have multiple root causes and multiple contributing factors, right? So here's some examples of contributing factors. These would be your unsafe acts and conditions, just another universal term for the unsafe acts and conditions. And these are what we're going to look at in our root cause scenario. So environmental, was it a congested work area, inadequate ventilation? Was it materials? Keep in mind that we're putting materials or equipment into our materials category. So was it defective or malfunctioning tools? Was it exposure to hazardous energy, inadequate warning system? It could be the task they were performing, right? Is it a repetitive task? Is there inadequate inspections for the task, inadequate job planning? And then the one we see very easily is the personnel and what the injured worker might have done wrong. Was it body posture or positioning? Was it complacency? Was it drugs or alcohol? And then a lesser considered bucket for contributing factors would be lack of safety policies, poor safety leadership, lack of training. This fits under our management system. So we're going to use these categories for our little root cause scenario. And again, after we identify these, it's going to help us get to the root cause. And this is just a useful way after an incident of brainstorming. That's what we're going to use it for, is brainstorming, is to break it out into these categories. All right, moving on to our root cause analysis. So there are lots of different tools for root cause analysis, and they're not mutually exclusive, right? You can use a combination of tools. to determine the root causes of your incidents. There is some proprietary software out there for determining root cause analysis. The FMEA is the failure modes and effect analysis, and there's also fault tree analysis. These tend to be geared more towards manufacturing, and they can be a little bit more difficult, right? We want your supervisors to be able to determine root causes. So what we're going to look at is brainstorming, and we're going to use the 5 why analysis, but use what works for you. There could be other tools available to you, checklist or another easy way to go through it, but there's tons of different resources for determining root cause. Again, we're going to use brainstorming and 5 why analysis. Like I said, we work in all industries, and I think that these are the most universal ways to determine root causes. And I want you to keep in mind that root cause analysis is a social science, right? It's not like math where 2 + 2 = 4, right? And it's also not going to work for every incident. Imagine you have an employee and we see these incidents, employees walking down a hall and they say, my knee gave out, and report a knee injury, right? Unless we are doctors and we have an MRI, there's no way we're going to determine the root cause, right? There's no unsafe acts or unsafe conditions. It's strictly, a personal health issue. We're not going to be able to dig into that. But let's use this as an example. Imagine a person drops a glass and it smashes. Well, what caused the glass to smash, right? And, that might seem like a crazy question, but this is how we're going to determine underlying causes. Is it the fact that the person let go of the glass? Is it the counterfactual point that somebody didn't catch the glass first? Maybe the person that was working there or someone else that was working beside them. Is it the fact that the glass didn't bounce? My grandmother, towards the end of her life, would always say that she wishes her dishes were made of rubber so they would bounce back up at her. Is it the existence of gravity, right? You might find yourself going down a line of reasoning that isn't useful, right? You're not going to be able to change gravity. So again, it's a social science, and it's just a tool to think through. If you find yourself going somewhere where it doesn't make sense, that's okay. Start over back at the beginning. Is it all the events that led up to the person being there in that place and time with their hands on the glass, right? So an incident investigation, let's say somebody goes up a ladder and gets injured climbing the ladder. As a safety person or supervisor or management, ask yourself, did they even have to go up the ladder? Was it faulty equipment that caused them to have to go up there? Can we prevent them from going up the ladder? That's what that last bullet is kind of getting at there. So, like I said, we're going to use 5 why analysis, and you all have experience doing this, right? You might not remember as a young child, you may have asked your parents why, or certainly if you have a toddler now, you're used to them asking you why in a repetitive manner. And that's what we're going to do. That's going to help us explore the cause and effect relationships underlying an incident or problem. And, the goal is to get to that root cause by continuously asking why. Where does the 5 why analysis come from? It comes from Sakishi Toyota. He's a Japanese inventor and industrialist. And the method of 5 why analysis was first adopted by Toyota production system, and it's part of lean philosophy, Six Sigma, stuff like that today. It's simple in concept, but it can be harder to complete, right? The more you do it, the better you're going to get at it. So we were just kind of doing that a little bit with our glass example. Again, you can see how it's difficult, and you might be going down a line of reasoning that doesn't make sense. That's okay. Go back to the top and try to get there. And we'll provide some examples here. So here's an example of a 5 why analysis. In this example, the problem is a vehicle will not start. Well, why will the vehicle not start? Well, the battery is dead. Why is the battery dead? The alternator is not functioning. Why is the alternator not functioning? The alternator belt has broken. Why has the alternator belt broken? The alternator belt was beyond its useful service life and not replaced. Maybe that's 50,000 miles. We're at 70,000 miles with the same factory belt on it. And why was the belt past its useful service life? The vehicle was not maintained according to recommended service schedule, right? So that is our underlying cause of the incident. And keep in mind, you don't always need 5 whys to get to the root cause. Like perhaps you would say the battery is dead, why the alternator belt is broken, right? You might skip that second why. That's okay. But typically, 5 whys is what we're shooting for, but you might not always need to go that far. It is useful to write out each individual step in the process and not skip ahead to things that, may be obvious. So here's another little root cause scenario. So in this case, a forklift operator slipped as they were stepping onto the forklift at the beginning of their shift, and they slipped on some oil, right? The corrective action was the operator was written up because they didn't complete a previous inspection checklist and the leak was repaired, right? Their corrective actions are not dealing with root causes. And hopefully you see that now, right? Because the operator didn't complete a previous inspection. That's an unsafe act, right? Well, why wasn't the inspection completed? That's what we really want to ask, right? The leak was repaired, but they never asked why the leak existed, right? Again, that's just an unsafe condition. It's not a root cause. So let's dig a little further here using our 5 why analysis, right? So the employee slipped on a fluid leak, right? Well, why did that occur? Well, a hydraulic hose was busted, right? That's where they stopped. And you can imagine the corrective action there. They just replaced the hose, but they didn't ask why the hydraulic hose burst in the first place, right? So a little further, it turns out that our mechanic actually used the wrong fluid and it deteriorated the hose, right? So you might be able to get an even better corrective action there. Perhaps, train all maintenance techs on the proper fluid to use. That's going to help prevent it in the future even more, right? You can see the deeper we dig, the better our corrective action is going to be. Okay, but why was the wrong fluid used? The mechanic wasn't aware, gets into the training again, but why was the mechanic not aware? We don't have any written maintenance procedures, right? So there we're truly getting to the root cause of a system-related reason. We started with the unsafe condition of the fluid on the floor, and we arrived at a management system issue. There are no written maintenance procedures, right? Again, if they just replace the hose, the mechanic's going to continue using the wrong fluid, and they never got to the root cause. Perhaps they stop at the 4th why, and they just train them on what fluid to use. But the reality is a mechanic could use the wrong fluid in the future if they don't have procedures and training in place for this example. So this really shows the deeper you dig, the better your corrective actions are going to be, because you're going to be at the root causes or underlying causes. So contributing factors, the hydraulic hose deteriorated and the lift has been leaking for a few days. The hazard was ignored. So perhaps we did more than 1 5 to dig down to this stuff, but failure to maintain the equipment was a root cause. The lack of a training program, right? The wrong hydraulic fluid was used, and lack of enforcement, right? Pre-use inspections at this organization were only completed 50% of the time. Right? That's a good test. If you think an employee's behavior is the root cause of an incident, ask yourself if all your other employees, or at least a significant proportion of them, 50%, are making the same mistake, right? That's an enforcement issue. That's not a behavioral issue on the employee's end. Here's another root cause scenario. So in this case, a caregiver at an assisted living facility had a lower back injury. They were manually lifting a resident to their feet. The employee failed to follow the care plan, which called for 2 people to use a lift when getting this resident up. And in this case, the corrective action was the caregiver was written up for not following the care plan, right? So again, they're just addressing the unsafe behavior. Doesn't sound like a root cause to me, or a system related reason, as OSHA would call it, right? So what are the actual deeper causes? Well, the contributing factors, again, these are unsafe acts and conditions, was the lift wasn't charged and ready for use. The employee was a smoker. So if you're a smoker, you're 2 to 3 times more likely to suffer a soft tissue injury, and it takes 3 to 5 times longer to heal. That's why we see lots of cases where surgery is needed with an injured employee that we're at a client we're working with, and the medical provider will actually require them to quit smoking before that surgery occurs. And that's because, again, it's going to take much longer to heal, much longer. It's harder to get, oxygen and nutrients to that injured area. And another contributing factor is they were short staffed, so it's harder to get help from a coworker to properly follow the care plan. The root causes in this case were failure to maintain equipment, right? There was a need for backup batteries. Perhaps it was previously identified. That happens a lot. An incident occurs, we say we're going to do XYZ, we do not do XYZ, and then the same incident happens in the future. It's also a lack of enforcement issue, right? So skipping care plans perhaps was a common practice at this assisted living facility. And keep in mind, when you're doing a 5 why analysis, sometimes your problem or incident is going to branch out, right? Like we said, there's multiple contributing factors, there's multiple unsafe acts and conditions, there's multiple root causes. So it's useful to branch out sometimes. Before we get into our root cause scenario, I want to talk a little bit about developing corrective actions. You want your corrective actions to be as effective as possible, right? And what I want to tell you is that retraining, administering discipline, or changing procedures are not the most effective thing you can do. This is actually at the bottom of our hierarchy of safety controls, right? So, hierarchy of safety controls. If you have a hazard that you want to mitigate, or you have an incident that you want to prevent in the future, it's very useful to think in these terms. The most effective thing we can do is eliminate a hazard. So this physically removes the hazard from the work environment to your employees. For example, let's say an employee was injured on a ladder. Can we prevent the employee from working from the ladder and bring the work to the ground level, right? That would be an example of eliminating a hazard. Perhaps you have roof work on one of your buildings, and yeah, your maintenance employee could probably do it, but you know what? You don't have a fall protection plan. You don't have the proper equipment and training. And so you subcontract that out to an organization that does have all those safety controls in place. That's another example of elimination, albeit someone else is exposed to the hazard, but they're properly trained, have the proper equipment. Substitution replaces the hazard. So this is typically around chemical exposure. So imagine if you have a solvent-based paint that's flammable and you move to a water-based paint, right? That's a substitution. Engineering controls. These isolate people from the hazard, such as a fixed barrier guard. And if you use engineering, changing the work environment, a lot of times you can almost eliminate a hazard through engineering controls, or pretty close to it. These are becoming less effective as we go down. So moving towards the bottom, we have your administrative controls. So this changes the way people work. These are your policies and procedures. Why is this not as effective? Well, it relies on your staff to do the right thing, to follow policies and procedures. And the least effective thing we can do, the last line of defense against the hazard, is personal protective equipment, right? PPE. Since the COVID pandemic, that's my one silver lining, is no one asked me what PPE stands for. Everybody just knows now. But COVID's a good example of PPE, right? How many people do you see wearing a mask like this with their nose out, right? So again, it's like our procedures. It relies on employees to properly care for and wear the PPE as they're supposed to. So start at the top of the pyramid when you're trying to mitigate a hazard, because this is going to be the most effective things you can do. Unfortunately, if you're a social service organization, most of your corrective actions are going to be around the administrative controls, the policies and procedures. And that's where you have to really make sure that those policies and procedures are airtight and being followed. There will be minor opportunities for engineering, changing the work environment to some degree, locked doors, things like that. but most of it's around the policies and procedures in the social service space. So here we have a video. This is a behind a bar in Ireland. And this was just after the Princess Diana car crash and death. So that was certainly a contributing factor to the incident, I would say. You probably already see what's going to happen here. So not a fun day for her, right? But what we're getting at there is that's a case where you have a policy or procedure in place to say, when we open this door, we have to communicate to each other that the door's open. Otherwise, somebody could fall, right? But think in terms of what the ideal would be. Let's eliminate the hazard. Perhaps long-term, and it'll take some significant capital to get there. We'll put the stairway to the basement outside the bar on the corner of the building so we can go down and not have this hazard, but that's going to take some time. So this is an example of where you have an extreme hazard and all you can do is have a policy and procedure in place, but you need to make sure it's followed. I should also say the person in the video actually wasn't injured as badly as you would think. This video clip went viral prior to the term going viral was even a term. I believe she was on Jimmy Kimmel at one point to discuss the incident after it occurred. As far as developing corrective actions, a big part of it is following up and making sure that those corrective actions are being followed by your employees, right? With that comes significant training. And use your safety committee, as I said earlier. Hey, how are we doing with this corrective action? Are employees following the new policy and procedure? Is the new equipment that we got in place and being properly utilized? They can be good gatekeepers of incident. Also, don't avoid pointing corrective actions on your investigation that you're not sure how to solve. Sometimes you as a supervisor might not be able to implement a corrective action yourself. Well, you could suggest it on the incident report, and then it's up to management to consider the feasibility of it. So moving on to our root cause scenario. So you guys have seen this a couple times now. We have different categories for unsafe acts and conditions. We have the task, the environment, the materials. We're going to call it materials / equipment, the personnel, the behaviors, or the management system. So as we go through this, I ask that you take a sheet of scratch paper and write these 5 boxes. Again, they're the task, the environment, the materials / equipment. We're calling it materials / equipment, the personnel, and management. And as we go through this scenario, I'm going to play 3 videos for you that were pre-recorded. And I want you to note any unsafe acts or conditions in each of these categories. So these are going to be our contributing factors, and they're going to help us determine the root causes. So first up, we have Jeff. He's the injured worker. He worked in the service industry as a bartender and manager for 25 years. He began working in his current role 7 days ago, so he's a new employee. His first 2 days were spent at safety orientation at his new job, and he received the training with the safety manager, but not much training from his supervisor. And Jeff, unfortunately, was working from a ladder and fell at 3:30 p.m. towards the end of his shift and fractured a femur. So there I was. It was a very hot and humid day. I think it was 85 degrees, 70% humidity. So I was looking forward to getting done with the workday. My boss, Brennan, assigned me to clean the windows up by the management area near the front office. I was using a small squeegee to do so. It was probably about 2, maybe 3 feet long squeegee. I wasn't aware of the best way to perform the task, but I knew I couldn't reach the top of the windows with the squeegee, and that's why I grabbed the ladder from the maintenance shed. Although I'll admit it wasn't the best place to set up a ladder because the ground's kind of uneven in that area. And while working to clean the windows, I decided to clean the gutter as well. I could tell that the gutter was overflowing and making the windows dirty in this area. So, I thought it would stay clean for a little longer. So I took a bucket with me, a 5-gallon bucket, and I tied it to the side of the top of the ladder so I could kind of put leaves and debris in there. At one point, I leaned a little bit too far to the left to reach the top of the gutter. And at that time, the ladder tipped and fell. I think my left knee is what struck the ground first. And that's why my femur was, fractured in two right after that. Like I said, I did get the ladder from the maintenance shed. I know it wasn't in the best condition, but Brennan told me that there were broken brackets on it, and apparently they were there before the incident. I noticed it was shaky, but I didn't notice that a bracket was bad. I'll admit I was rushing to get the work done. My son had a baseball game at 4:30, and I've missed games because of work earlier in the season. So I wanted to do, everything I could to get out of there on time. And now I have a fractured leg, and I'm stuck in the maintenance shop. They have me working sedentary duty to write new maintenance procedures. So not exactly what I'd rather be doing, but I guess the incident could have been worse. Next, we have Brad. So Brad is the CFO. He's been the CFO at our company for 3 years. And Brad actually requested that Brennan have somebody clean the windows at his office. And he's a witness, so he physically saw the incident occur.
Well, that was on a management call, and there's somebody working outside, so take a look. I saw Jeff on the ladder, bucket tied to the side, which I knew wasn't stable. So down to see if he had a spotter, and there wasn't anybody there. Probably should have stopped and got Jeff's supervisor. Talked about safety situation, but I know we've been short-staffed, especially in maintenance. So I just kept on with the call.
And last up, we have Brennan. So this is Jeff's supervisor, the injured employee supervisor. So sometimes you might want to interview people as part of your investigation that just work in the area or were a supervisor or manager. You don't have to just look at injured employees and the witnesses of an incident. And Brennan has been supervising maintenance staff for 5 years.
I signed Jeff to clean the office windows. He wasn't aware of the rule that we have. We're supposed to be using a spotter when we're working from a ladder because he's so new to the job. I figured that the safety manager had covered that with him during new hire orientation. We never clean windows using a ladder anymore. We use a pressure washer and a long-handled squeegee. After Billy fell off of the ladder years ago, we put this new window cleaning process in place so that they could clean from the ground and not work from an elevated height. We pretty much eliminated all of our ladder work after that. It is pretty uncommon to do this job, though. We only do it twice a year, so we probably missed it during training. To top things off, Jeff was using a wooden ladder, which was in horrible condition that nobody else uses ever. I've been meaning to throw it away, but just haven't gotten around to it. He got it from the maintenance shed, which needs cleaned out desperately. The long-handled squeegee was right next to the ladder as well. To top things off, my mom's been ill. She's been in the hospital for the past week. I've been in and out of the hospital visiting her and just haven't had time to touch base with Jeff as much as I'd like to.
So let's see how we all did with brainstorming, right? That's what we're doing. We're brainstorming contributing factors, which are the unsafe acts and conditions. And it's just useful to put them in these categories, right? Now, keep in mind, this is just a brainstorming tool. You might have the same unsafe act or condition listed in a different category than I do. That's fine. We're still going to get to the root cause. It's just useful to think in these terms. So as far as the task, hopefully you have the fact that the employee tied a 5-gallon bucket to the top of the ladder to remove debris. That absolutely contributed. How about the fact that the employee didn't follow the cleaning windows procedure, right? He was supposed to clean them from ground level, but we're going to dig into why didn't he do it the proper way? Was he aware? Things like that. On the environment, did you catch that Jeff said it was a hot and humid day? I think he said something like 85 degrees on that day. You might have also caught that the ground was uneven. So we're going to dig into that as well. How about on materials? Did you get that the equipment, the ladder was damaged, unstable, and flexed when it was loaded? Did you get that bullet? How about management? No coworkers were available to assist. The employee was exhausted from working long hours, he had said. And I believe the CFO also said that they've been short-staffed in maintenance. Also, Brennan, right? He didn't fully explain the job, right? His mother's been in the hospital, so he's kind of been absent-minded from the work environment. On the personnel end, right? The stuff that's easy to see. The employee admitted they were rushing, happened at the end of the shift. He wanted to get to his son's baseball game. How about the fact that the employee was inexperienced, right? First week on the job, this incident occurred, and the employee tied the 5-gallon bucket to the ladder, right? We also had that in the task section. Again, this is just a brainstorming tool. So we identified our contributing factors or unsafe acts and conditions, and now we're going to ask why they were in place using the 5 why analysis, right? So start with the tasks. The employee fell from the ladder. Well, why was that? What we already noted, the employee did not follow the procedure to clean the windows from the ground level. Why did they not follow the procedure? Employee was not properly trained. So here we have a 1 why analysis, right? Sometimes it might be very clear to just jump to write what that root cause is. That's a system related reason. All right, our other finding, the employee tied the 5-gallon bucket to the ladder. Why did they tie the 5-gallon bucket to the ladder? The employee took it upon himself to clean the gutters. Why? The employee's inexperienced working from the ladder and did not foresee the hazard that they created with doing that. Why? The employee was not properly trained, right? So sometimes doing a 5 why analysis, you're going to come to the same conclusion, but different ways of getting there. Moving on to the environment, right? So we noted it was a hot and humid day. Why? It's summer. Okay, just like our, remember the glass smashing example? We didn't get anywhere useful with that. That's fine. I don't know how to get anywhere useful. I mean, maybe we could say it's a hot and humid day, and we should have selected a different day to do this. Well, that's not always feasible, right? Particularly if you're down in Georgia or something like that. The environment, what else was there? Well, the ground was uneven. Why is the ground uneven? The ground allows for proper drainage, right? So our building doesn't get flooded. And why don't we want our building flooded? Again, we're not getting anywhere useful with that. That's okay. It's just a tool to help us get to these causes. You're not always going to get there. How about the materials / equipment? Well, the wooden ladder was damaged, unstable, and flexed when loaded. Why is that? The wooden ladder had a 5-gallon bucket connected. Why is that? The employee is inexperienced and did not foresee the hazard. Why is that? The employee was not properly trained. So we got there 3 different ways so far to the training. Remember how I said your 5 why analysis can branch out? So here we're branching out. We have the wooden ladder was damaged, unstable, and flexed and loaded twice. Well, why is that? The wooden ladder had a broken bracket and damaged legs. Why? Maintenance failed to remove it from service. You heard Brennan say, the supervisor say, hey, I was meaning to remove that. You know, I see that a lot in companies. They say something like, oh, it's fine sitting on the production floor. No one's going to use that. And then somebody eventually uses it and it leads to injury. Well, we don't have a red tag system in place, lack of accountability for removing it, right? So if you tag things that you don't want employees to use, that is the ideal. Maybe it's waiting to be repaired. If it's something that can't be repaired, throw it away, take it out of service. That's probably the case with the ladder, is it should have been thrown away. Personnel end. What did we note there? The employee was inexperienced. Why is the employee inexperienced? Didn't have the proper training. Again, got there in 2 whys. The other one, the employee was rushing. The incident occurred at end of shift. Why is that? The employee stated that he wanted to get done to go to his son's baseball game. Again, we're not getting anywhere useful with that. That's okay. On the management end, the employee fell from the ladder. Why is that? No coworkers were available to assist, and he was exhausted from working long hours. Why is that? Billy recently quit, and we've had trouble hiring people since COVID began. Why is that? Right? Again, we might not get anywhere useful. Perhaps you could, and you're on this and you get somewhere useful. I wasn't able to get anywhere useful. All right, our other bullet, the supervisor did not fully explain how to complete job. Why was that? The supervisor thought the safety manager covered the spotter rule. If you remember, Brennan said, oh, I thought that the safety person went over this in orientation. Why is that? Well, it's not just a lack of training, it's a lack of outline training requirements, right? So what does the safety manager complete and what does the supervisor complete? That wasn't properly outlined. So this kind of puts our contributing factors and root causes together. So the root causes are in orange. You can see we got the lack of training 3 times. We got the lack of a red tag system once, and we got the lack of outline training requirements. So those are our root causes, and the things in black are the contributing factors, the unsafe acts and conditions, right? Again, the root causes are system related reasons. And I just want to show you an example of a fishbone diagram. It's essentially a different way of doing the brainstorming. We have it broken out in squares. In this case, we have it broken out in a fishbone diagram. And for a fishbone diagram, I was taught that you essentially look for what comes up the most in different categories. In this case, untrained workers. You pull out the system-related reasons for the root cause. I think brainstorming and 5Y are a little bit easier to think through on a fundamental level. So that's the end of our presentation. I hope it was informative for you, and leave us a Google review if you enjoyed this. Thank you.